Hello everybody, Dr. Duke here with another episode of Right Makes Might. Let's get back into it immediately, and we are back on campus where the Orwellian speech codes, the discriminatory behavior, the rank censorship of ideas that professors and administrators don't like, it's really out of hand. Take the case of Ben Sweethood, a recent graduate of Columbia University in New York. Back in the fall of 2014, while he was still a student, he remembers being in his Chinese language class where he was learning Chinese vocabulary. At one point, the teacher asked him to use new vocabulary words in a sentence. Mr. Sweetwood simply made a sentence in Chinese that said, quote, "I am handsome. I consider myself handsome" in Chinese. That was the assignment. He took the word and used it. Well, a student in the class actually reported him to the Gender-Based Misconduct Office. Yes, you heard that right. Universities now have things like gender-based misconduct offices. So it's not enough to explore kids for general harassment. It's not enough to have millions of dollars spent on diversity officers and initiatives. Now we're breaking it up into transgender misconduct groups, gender misconduct groups, racial misconduct groups. Mr. Sweetwood was reported by the teacher who was complained to, a student complained to her. She was forced to report him to this gender-based misconduct office, and he then had meetings with the teacher, the dean of the university, the college, the case manager for the gender-based misconduct office. All three of those individuals agreed that they themselves were reluctant to call what he had done a problem, but their hands were tied. There was absolutely no way they could not follow the Orwellian procedures that had been put in place already. And then let's take the case of Keaton Walbon, and this is just this week at the University of Tennessee. He's a student. He was taking a quiz in his earth science class. On the actual quiz that the professor wrote for the kids, one of the questions was, quote, "What is the name of the female lab instructor in your section? What is the name of the female lab instructor in our class?" The professor even went so far as to add after that, and this is a direct quote, "If you don't remember her name, make something good up," unquote. Well, Keaton Walbon wrote Sarah Jackson, a name picked out of the hat, he said, on that slot where it was part of the quiz, he had to fill it out. He didn't know the lab instructor's name, so he wrote Sarah Jackson. Professor Bill Dean, the professor for the course, in grading his quiz, circled it, gave him a 0, and called it sexually offensive, called it a form of gender harassment that he wrote that name. Why? Because unbeknownst to pretty much you and me and everybody else in the world, but known to Professor Bill Dean, the name Sarah Jackson, it's a very common name, is also the name of a lingerie nude model. So Professor Bill Dean then, who knew who Sarah Jackson was, assumed that the student was talking about this nude model and gave him a 0 for the quiz. When Keaton protested by email that this was unfair, and clearly it is, the professor wrote back, and I quote, "Dear Keaton, I have no way of determining your intention. I can only consider the result. The result is that you gave the name of Sarah Jackson, who is a lingerie and nude model. That result meets with Title IX definitions of sexual harassment. The grade of 0 stands and will not be changed." That is absolutely staggering. Professor Dean, how do you know that the Sarah Jackson he meant is the Sarah Jackson that your twisted imagination associates immediately with nudity and lingerie? And why can't Keaton come back and sue you, report you to the Gender Discrimination Office, because you're the one who put in his head that Sarah Jackson was a nude model? And what I love most about this, as we saw in the case of Mr. Sweetwood, this is all a result of the Obama administration rewriting Title IX legislation to punish people who step in any way, shape, or form out of line according to the federal government. What President Obama did was rewrite Title IX definitions, rewrite Title IX legislation to make it irrelevant what a person intends when they say something. So the fact that Keaton innocently wrote the name Sarah Jackson, it doesn't matter if he had Sarah Jackson, his next door neighbor, in mind. According to Title IX, thank you, President Obama, Keaton is guilty regardless of what his intent is. You can no longer address, if you're accused of harassment, if you're accused of bigotry or bias, if you're accused of the cardinal sin of being male, and you intended nothing wrong, it doesn't matter because your intent doesn't matter. Then take the strange case of James Madison University. Before classes even started this fall, campus diversity offers distributed to every single student incoming to campus a document with 35 phrases that you are no longer allowed to say on campus, phrases that if you utter them could get you in trouble, possibly even suspended. Look at the first one. If you on campus say, "Some of my best friends are ... What they're trying to do is criminalize certain kinds of speech. So if I'm talking to an African American and I say some of my best friends are African American, you're telling me that my opinion is invalidated. Even though I do have black friends, I'm not allowed to reference them because when I reference my black friends, that's denying my white privilege. The level that they're going to control speech here is staggering. How about the second one? The same thing happens to me too, right? When somebody claims a lesbian person, a transgender person, says, I've experienced discrimination in my life. And you have the temerity to respond, same thing's happened to me, I have too. We've seen 2 white males in this segment alone who've been discriminated against, but their experience doesn't count, right? So when you say the same thing happens to me, you are trivializing the experiences only of minorities. How about the next one? You have such a pretty face. Literally, to say you have such a pretty face is now a macro aggression at James Madison University. I never owned slaves. Got news for you, James Madison. There's no one alive today outside of the Muslim world who ever did own slaves. Nobody, zip, zero, nada. There is not a single student or their parents, the parents of your students, on a college campus that ever owned slaves. And so what do we have now? We have you criminalizing the argument, attempting to criminalize the argument that that statement is itself bigoted. Why? Because to deny that I own slaves would subtly suggest that I'm not responsible for what happened 200 years ago. When people of faith say, love the sinner, hate the sin. So you're basically telling all people of faith that their religious and moral values do not permit them to say something as basic as that. And finally, here's another book on political correctness. These morons are even trying to criminalize your criticism of their pamphlet. So I'm going to say it, James Madison. I'm not on your campus, thank God for you, but I'm going to say it right to your face. Here's another stupid book on political correctness.
This is Right Makes Might with Dr. Duke.